Why was the forest so silent? Not the silence of peace, but the kind that pressed against the skin, heavy and waiting, as though the trees themselves were holding their breath. Fog rolled down from the ridges like the slow exhale of a sleeping giant. It filled the pass in veils of gray, swallowing rocks, swallowing distance, making the world smaller until even memory felt smudged. The pines loomed above, their crowns whispering faintly in the wind, but what they whispered no human ear could catch. It was a murmur that unsettled even seasoned soldiers, because it felt alive, as if the forest judged what was about to unfold. Major Cross crouched low in the shadows, her braid dark against her back, tight and neat, a line of order in a place where order was vanishing. She had worn that braid through parachute jumps, cockpit missions, and now here in the throat of a mountain where death was certain. Beneath the plates of her combat harness, the green of her old flight suit clung faintly, a reminder of skis she once ruled. A pilot turned ranger. A soldier who had once flown above storms now crouched inside one. Her rangers stretched out around her, hidden in the trees and rocks. Each man steady, each breath measured, yet every heartbeat leaning unconsciously toward her presence. They didn't have to look to know she was there. They felt her steadiness the way sailors feel the keel of a ship underfoot. But what none of them knew, not fully, was the weight she carried. The silence she wore like armor wasn't just discipline, it was a shield. Because if she let them see even one fracture, one doubt, it would spread like wildfire. And she couldn't allow that, not tonight. From deep in the fog came the sound. Engines muted, distorted, their growl bending strangely through the mist. The metallic clank of armor, the rattle of chains, boots on hard earth. The rhythm of an enemy battalion moving closer. The men around her tensed, but none spoke, not one. They had learned to match her silence, learned to trust it. Still, she could feel their unease pressing at her from all sides. The pass was a tomb. If they held it too long, it would bury them all. 12 hours, that was the order. Delay the enemy convoy for 12 hours, no matter the cost. No matter the cost. When her commander had given her that assignment, he hadn't looked her in the eye. He hadn't needed to. She understood. This wasn't a mission. It was a sentence. A way of holding back the tide with human lives, hers included. And yet she had given no argument, not a single word. Her silence had been its own oath. She had nodded once and fate had been sealed. Now, crouched in the breathless dark of the pass, she replayed that briefing in her mind. The dim tent. The map spread flat on the table, black lines tracing ridges and valleys like scars in paper. The choke points circled in grease pencil, the one narrow throat of stone where the enemy had to pass. If they broke through, the valley below would collapse, and with it, everything beyond. She remembered how the air in that tent had felt. Not like air at all, but weight. The weight of thousands of lives that would never know her name, but would rest on her shoulders. And now here she was, the fog brushing damp fingers across her face, her sidearm pressed cold against her hip, her rifle balanced like a second heartbeat in her hands. The convoy was near. She pressed her cheek against the stock of the weapon, her eye peering through the scope. The glass cut a circle of clarity through the gray. Shapes began to emerge, trucks, blurred silhouettes of men on foot, rifles slung across their shoulders. Not many details, just fragments, but fragments were enough. Her finger rested steady on the trigger guard. Not yet. Behind her eyes, another thought burned quietly, unspoken. Not all of them will walk away from this. Not all of us. She wondered if the men around her had made peace with that truth, or if they still clung to some small hope of rescue. She could not give them hope. She didn't believe in herself. All she could give them was steadiness. But there was something she hadn't told them. Not yet. Her side ached, an old wound from another mission, one that had never fully healed. The medics had said she was fit for duty, but pain had a way of returning when the body remembered. And tonight, she knew her body would remember. She had chosen to keep it quiet, not because she feared weakness, but because she knew they needed her whole, at least until the end. The engines grew louder. The convoy moved into the choke point, the mountain walls pressing close on either side. The fog thickened, carrying the smell of resin, oil, and wet earth. The forest seemed to lean in, its ancient trunks like witnesses. She could almost feel them watching, waiting to see who would endure and who would not. Her rangers waited for her signal, every muscle held in quiet suspension, fingers steady on weapons, hearts caught between fear and faith. She inhaled once, slow, quiet. Then she gave the smallest nod. The pass erupted. Mines thundered beneath the soil, hurling steel and dirt into the air. The lead truck lifted like a toy, twisted apart in an instant before crashing down in flame. Fire spread through the fog, glowing orange and violent, turning gray into a storm of light and shadow. Another explosion split the second vehicle in two, scattering men into the mud. Shouts filled the pass, colliding with each other, distorted by the cliffs until no one could tell command from chaos. Her rangers remained silent. Then the first volley of suppressed fire cracked out, soft in the release, brutal in the impact. Officers dropped where they stood. Shouts cut short in mid-command. Panic rippled. The convoy faltered, men spinning to find an enemy they couldn't see. Watched through her scope, her breath measured, her pulse steady. Her finger tightened, one shot clean and final. A figure crumpled. Another command silenced. Her men followed her rhythm, each shot purposeful, each target chosen with precision. The fog twisted voices into lies. Orders became echoes. Soldiers fired into shadows, into the trees, into each other. Confusion bloomed like wildfire. The enemy crumbled not just from bullets but from fear. Calm was unbreakable. Even as flames painted the mist in violent colors, even as shouts turned to screams, she was stillness. Her rangers mirrored her. Yet inside, beneath the discipline, something moved. A memory sharp and unwelcome. A younger sitting in the cockpit of her fighter jet looking down at the earth below. She had thought back then that distance kept her safe. That war, seen from above, could be contained, controlled. She had been wrong. Down here in the mud, war had a face, many faces, and each one haunted her. But she couldn't allow that weakness to rise. Not here, not now. She shifted her rifle, her voice a whisper through the calm. Left flank, sweep. Two men vanished into the mist, soundless. A flick of her wrist, another squad shifted position. Every gesture exact, every movement tightening the noose. The enemy's fear thickened into terror. Shouts turned frantic, their formations breaking, their rifles firing into nothing. The fog became alive in their minds, full of phantoms, and to them was not a woman, not a ranger, not even flesh. She was a presence, a shadow, a wraith. She let them believe it, because fear was the sharpest weapon she carried. Still behind her eyes, one thought pressed, quiet but relentless. How long could they hold? How many hours before her men became the ones swallowed by this mist? The order was 12 hours, but already she wondered at what cost. And somewhere deep in the fog, beneath the crack of rifles and the scream of fire, she felt the first pull of something darker, not fear, not duty, but inevitability. The truth that this night would not end clean, that she might not walk out alive. She steadied her breath, her finger tightening again. The battle had only begun. Why had the laughter stopped so suddenly? Moments ago, one of the younger rangers had whispered a joke about the fog, how it rolled in faster than their nerves. The laughter had been thin, sharp, the kind men forced out because silence weighed too heavily. But now that silence was back, heavier than before, pressing down until even breath felt dangerous. The ambush had worked. The convoy lay burning, their commanders already silenced, their formations broken. And yet, Cross knew better than to mistake chaos for victory. The fog made everything a deception. She shifted her rifle, eyes pressed to the scope. Through the circle of glass, the world was reduced to fragments, a shoulder, a flash of steel, a silhouette moving through smoke. Enough to end a life. Enough to keep her men alive a moment longer. A figure lunged from the haze, rifle raised, firing wild bursts into the trees. His breath held for the briefest instant. She exhaled slowly, squeezed the trigger, and the figure dropped without a sound. Another silhouette tried to rally soldiers behind a burning truck. A second shot silenced him. Her rangers mirrored her control. Each shot was a thread in a pattern she alone seemed to see. The enemy grew more frantic with every heartbeat, their shouts colliding in confusion, their bullets cracking into empty trees. And yet, even as the trap closed, felt something cold tugging at her ribs. Not the wound she carried, though the ache pulsed like a hidden ember. No, this was deeper. A realization she could not ignore. The forest was swallowing them all. Enemy and ranger alike. Every shot they fired, every mine that tore the air apart, every scream cut short, it was all claimed by the fog. Would anyone ever know what had happened here? Or would it all vanish, buried beneath silence, erased by time until even their names were gone? She forced the thought down. There would be time for reflection if survival allowed it. Right flank, push forward, she whispered into the calm. Her voice carried calm, but her men could not see the way her hand trembled just once before she steadied it against the rifle. The squad moved, silent as shadows, their boots muffled by wet needles. They slipped through the mist, positions shifting like predators circling prey, tracked their movement with one eye, then swung her scope back to the convoy. The enemy was breaking apart. Some fled deeper into the pass, stumbling blindly. Others crouched low, firing at phantoms, their rifles snapping in panic. But then a new sound. A distant whistle, faint but rising. Mortars. Stomach tightened. The first round struck the hillside above with a roar that rattled teeth. Soil and stone erupted, showering sparks into the mist. Shouts rang out, not hers, but enemy voices urging their men forward under the cover of fire. More rounds followed, each explosion cracking the mountain's silence apart. Her rangers ducked low, pressing themselves against earth, bark, rock, whatever held. The forest shuddered under the barrage. Pines splintered, trunks falling in fiery arcs. The fog lit with flashes of orange and white, shadows leaping and vanishing with every detonation. "Hold positions," ordered, her voice calm though her chest ached with every blast. "Stay low, stay silent." But inside, doubt gnawed. How long could silence shield them when fire rained from the sky? Her mind flashed back to the map, the circle of the choke point, the finger tracing the only path the convoy could take. This was where the battle had to be contained. If the rangers broke here, the valley beyond would fall. She forced her breath steady, peered once more through her scope. Through smoke and shrapnel, she saw them, enemy infantry advancing behind the mortar fire. Bayonets glinting, rifles shaking in nervous hands. They pushed forward in staggered lines, eyes wide as they peered into fog. "Wait," whispered into the calm, though her rangers already knew. They trusted her timing more than their own nerves. The enemy drew closer, boots crunching mud, slipping on fuel and blood. One squad moved into the very center of the pass, shouting, firing bursts into emptiness. "Now!" gave a signal, sharp and deliberate. The forest answered. A hidden charge detonated, sending a massive pine crashing across the path. The roar was like bones breaking. Men scattered, panic snapping their fragile cohesion. Shouts filled the air, commands lost in echoes. A trip flare hissed to life, painting the mist in pale fire. Enemy soldiers fired wildly into the blaze, convinced they had found their target. But there was nothing there, only the illusion she had set. Her men held their silence. Then, with surgical precision, suppressed rifles whispered again. 1, 2, 3 figures folded into the mud before the rest even realized. The enemy faltered, hesitated, and hesitation was fatal. Cross raised her hand. Another signal. A recording crackled to life through hidden speakers, fragments of ranger voices, clipped commands carried by the fog. The echoes twisted, bouncing off the cliffs until no one could tell where they began or ended. Soldiers spun in circles, rifles raised against ghosts. The mist betrayed them at every turn. Tracked a figure through her scope, watched him stumble forward, eyes wild, his rifle jerking at every shadow. She tightened her finger, then paused. He couldn't have been more than 19. His helmet loose on his head, his breath ragged, his fear written across every movement. For a fraction of a second she hesitated. Was he an enemy? Yes. But was he also a boy dragged into a war he did not understand? The question cut at her chest. She steadied her breath, pulled the trigger. The boy dropped silently into the mud. The scope blurred. For just a moment, shut her eyes. This was the part no one ever saw. The split second where duty and conscience collided. The space where a soldier's humanity lingered, then was silenced. She opened her eyes. There was no time for grief. Her men depended on her clarity. The fog thickened again, wrapping around the pass. And in that veil of gray, a new word carried on enemy voices, hushed but desperate: the Wraith. That was what they were calling her now. Not commander, not ranger, the Wraith. It should have been a weapon, a name to stoke fear. And it was. But somewhere deep inside, wondered what it meant that her enemies saw her as less than human. Was that what survival demanded? To become a phantom, a shadow, a legend carved from fear? Or was it the first step toward losing herself entirely? The thought lingered as the firefight raged on. Bullets cracked, grenades rolled, rifles whispered. Her rangers struck and vanished, until the pass was littered with confusion, fire, and death. Still the enemy pressed forward, still they came. And knew this was only the beginning. Why hadn't they moved? Heard their voices through the comms, clipped, urgent, edged with fear. One squad was trapped, pinned between falling trees and the roar of enemy machine guns. They were calling positions, requesting suppressing fire, their calm cracking at the edges. The forest had been theirs only moments ago, cloaked in fog and silence. Now it was a cage. Artillery rained down, shredding bark, smashing stone. Pines toppled in fiery arcs, branches glowing like brands as they fell. The fog lit with violent bursts, explosions carving holes in the gray veil before it closed again, thicker and heavier as if trying to smother the fire. Her rangers clung to what cover remained, rifles trembling in desperate bursts to keep the enemy at bay. Pressed her cheek harder against the stock of her rifle, scope cutting a circle through chaos. She saw flashes, a turret swinging, infantry charging, her pinned men firing wildly to buy themselves seconds, that was all they had. Covering fire now, her voice was steady, precise, as if calm alone could hold the world together. Her men obeyed instantly, unleashing a storm of suppressed shots into the advancing line. Bullets cracked through the mist, forcing infantry to duck, to scatter, to hesitate. Broke from her cover. She didn't wait for permission from herself. The decision was made before thought could argue. She sprinted through churned mud, explosions erupting behind and ahead, bark splintering across her face, shards of stone slashing her arms. Bullets cracked so close she felt the braid at her back tugged by their wake. She slid hard into cover beside her trapped squad, mud splattering across her uniform, her rifle already snapping to position. Their faces turned at once, relief, disbelief, fear colliding in their eyes. She was their commander, their anchor if she had come. Then hope hadn't abandoned them yet. Short bursts keep them pivoting, grenades on my mark. Her voice was calm, her signals sharp. Her men steadied, matching her rhythm, suppressing fire burst out, forcing turrets to swing wide. 2 rangers lobbed grenades into the fog, explosions scattering infantry and tearing holes in their line. "Move," shouted, signaling forward. One by one, they crawled and sprinted in bursts, slipping from their trap. Then the mountain answered. A mortar slammed into the slope yards away, the blast cracking the air like thunder. Soil and rock hurled forward in a wave. Felt the strike before she saw it, a shard of shrapnel slicing across her side. Hot pain tore through her, staggering her breath, pulling her briefly to one knee. Her hand pressed instinctively to her ribs. Warmth spread fast, soaking beneath the harness, through the green of her old flight suit. Her men saw it, their eyes wide. One opened his mouth, but she cut him off with a look, a single sharp shake of her head. Pain could not matter, not now, not while they were watching. "Forward," she snapped, her jaw tight, voice like steel dragged across stone. The squad obeyed, moving with renewed urgency. She lifted her rifle again, pressed it to her shoulder despite the fire searing her side. Every shot was agony, every breath a cut, but she made it steady for them. They regrouped behind a ridge. Cover at last, though thin and fragile, slumped briefly against the earth. Her teeth clenched as blood seeped warm beneath her plates. Her lungs caught on pain, but her eyes stayed steady. She wouldn't let them see her break. Around her, the forest seemed to change. The fog that had cloaked them thinned under the heat of fire, drifting apart in tatters. Shafts of pale sunlight pierced through, falling on churned earth, broken trucks and bodies strewn like discarded uniforms. What had been theirs was gone. The fog, their greatest weapon, was slipping away. His heart pounded as she scanned the valley below. The enemy regrouped. Emboldened by fire, armored vehicles rumbled forward through wreckage, their turrets swinging with mechanical precision. Infantry swarmed behind, shouting orders, rifles raised, bayonets catching the light. She knew what had to be done. The enemy had to be drawn deeper, farther into the pass, into the throat of the mountain where their last trap waited. Her decision came without hesitation. She rose from cover. For a moment she let herself be seen, a figure in the smoke, braid trailing, rifle steady. Bullets snapped past, tearing bark, cracking stone, but she held long enough for their commander to see her. It was bait, and he took it. His voice roared through the mist, orders sharp with fury: pursue, press forward, finish it. The enemy surged into the choke point, armored vehicles grinding forward, infantry crowding close behind. Dropped back into cover, her breath ragged from pain, but her hands steady as she gave the signal. A sharp gesture. The ground itself answered. Charges detonated in sequence, thunder splitting the mountain, cliffs convulsed, stone cracked loose in massive slabs, tumbling into the road with earth-shaking force. Pines toppled with them, roots tearing free, trunks crashing down like titans. The road sealed itself in ruin. Boulders and trees twisted into a barricade no engine could pass. Smoke and dust swallowed the convoy in a choking storm. The trap had closed. Vehicles smashed against fallen stone, armor crumpling under weight. Soldiers scattered, shouting, firing blindly into fog as if the mist itself were their enemy. Her men moved with ruthless precision. Suppressed rifles whispered. Grenades rolled beneath vehicles, bursting in sharp flashes. Shrapnel tearing through clustered infantry. Blades found bodies in silence, close and final. The pass became a slaughterhouse. Fought among them, her wound burning with every breath, but her rifle steady, her commands clipped to the enemy. She was everywhere and nowhere, a shadow glimpsed only before death arrived. Still their commander's voice rose above the ruin, defiant, furious. She saw him through her scope, a tall figure framed in smoke and fire, rifle raised, roaring for his men to stand, to fight, to follow against the collapse of his army. He was a beacon of rage. Her breath caught in pain as she steadied her rifle, her finger tightened. One shot, silent, precise. The echo of his voice died with him. The battlefield stilled. The fog rolled back down from the ridges, slower now, as though exhausted by the storm. Fires guttered in the damp air, leaving faint orange glows inside the gray. Pines swayed overhead, their creaks like weary sighs. Around her, her rangers moved silently among the fallen. They counted their wounded, covered their dead. Rifles were laid across bodies, helmets lowered, heads bowed, no words, only instinctive rituals born of men who had walked too long with death. Moved among them, her hand brushing rifles left in tribute, her eyes unflinching. Every body she passed added weight to her own chest. Her side burned, her uniform soaked, but she would not let them see weakness. Not yet. She stepped back, her gaze sweeping across the battlefield, the shattered convoy, the broken bodies, the fog reclaiming all of it. Victory lay scattered before her, but it did not feel like victory. War, she knew, was not about who lived, it was about what remained in silence. And as she turned back into the mist, one thought pressed harder than pain, harder than grief. This was not over. The mountains still demanded more. Why did silence feel heavier than gunfire? The explosions had stopped, the mortars were quiet, even the enemy's shouts had faded into nothing. Yet somehow the absence of noise pressed harder on his chest than the battle ever had. The fog crept back down from the ridges, carrying the smell of resin, smoke, and blood. Fires guttered in the damp air, glowing faintly like dying stars. The pines swayed overhead, their groans sounding almost like grief. Her rangers moved among the ruin with quiet purpose. No one shouted, no one called orders. Their voices, when they spoke at all, were murmurs, clipped words to mark a position, request a bandage, count a number that felt too heavy to say aloud. The wounded were gathered, the missing noted, the fallen covered with scarves, with hands with reverence. Rifles were laid across still bodies, helmets lowered, heads bowed. There was no ritual, no priest, no words written in doctrine, only instinct. Soldiers who had walked beside death too often to need instruction on how to face him. One ranger pressed his hand against the chest of a comrade, holding it there until his own breathing steadied. Another draped a scarf across a lifeless face, as if protecting him from the fog that clung like a shroud. Moved among them with a steadiness that cost her every step. Her side burned, blood soaking through her flight suit, each breath dragging fire through her ribs, yet her face betrayed nothing. She would not add her weakness to the weight of their grief. At each body she paused, her hand brushed rifles left in tribute, her eyes steady and unflinching. She carried each man's memory into herself, as if it were her burden to bear. Her rangers looked to her not for words. She had given few since the mission began, but for proof that they could still stand, and so she stood. But when she stepped away from the line of her men, her gaze falling back to the battlefield itself, the truth pressed harder. The convoy lay shattered, vehicles twisted, soldiers scattered. Their commander, once defiant, once furious, was now nothing more than another body swallowed by mist. The enemy had spoken of her in whispers, the Wraith. They had believed in the phantom she had become. And yet did not feel like a wraith. She felt the weight of flesh, the ache of blood, the fire of pain. She was human, and war demanded humanity be buried piece by piece until nothing remained. Her breath caught. Was that what frightened her more than death? Not the end itself, but the erosion that came before it, the slow surrender of everything human to the silence of duty. The fog pressed closer, as though listening. She looked back at her rangers, some crouched beside the wounded, binding torn flesh with steady hands. Others sat in silence, heads bowed, their rifles across their knees. They looked older than they had the night before, older than their years. The battle had carved lines into their faces that would never fade. She wondered if they knew, if they felt, as she did, that this was not survival, it was delay. Nothing more, 12 hours, no matter the cost. But time was a cruel master, every second bought with blood. A whisper cracked through the comms, a lookout on the ridge. Movement. His jaw tightened, her heart slowed in that familiar, deliberate rhythm. The battle wasn't finished. The enemy wasn't broken, they had only been staggered. She gave a signal. Her men rose silently, instinctively, their grief folded into discipline, weapons lifted, positions taken. She crouched low, her rifle pressed to her shoulder. Ignoring the fire in her side through the scope, she scanned the mist. Shapes shifted, vague silhouettes moving with care, not in chaos but in coordination, reinforcements. Of course, the mountain pass was too important. The enemy wouldn't abandon it, not yet. Her rangers tensed, their breaths caught. They were fewer now, wounded, bloodied, already stretched thin. And yet the fog carried the sound of more boots, more rifles, more engines. Exhaled slowly, steadied her voice over the calm. Hold positions, conserve rounds, we bleed them here. Her words carried calm, but inside something fractured. She thought of the promise she had given with her silence in that dim briefing tent. 12 hours, delay at all costs, but at what cost? How many more men? How many more lives? The thought gnawed, sharp as the pain in her side. Was sacrifice still noble when it became inevitable? Or was it just another form of cruelty, dressed in the language of duty? The fog thickened, the silhouettes drew nearer. Her men waited, rifles steady, eyes fixed on her. She felt their faith pressing against her like a weight she could not drop. They believed in her silence, in her steadiness, in her unshakable command. They believed she could see through the mist when they could not. But she couldn't see everything, not anymore. She swallowed the doubt. It had no place here. Doubt would kill them faster than bullets. Her finger brushed the trigger guard. Her cheek pressed harder to the rifle stock. Her breath slowed, steady, deliberate. The first shot would come from her. It always did. Because if she hesitated, they would too. Through the scope, a face emerged from the fog, young, wide-eyed, fear hidden behind duty. A boy, perhaps no older than some of her own men had been when they first joined. For a moment the world stilled. Then her finger tightened. The shot cracked softly, swallowed by the mist. The figure fell. Her men fired with her. The silence broke. And the battle began again. The fog absorbed the sound, carrying echoes into the ridges. The mountains shuddered beneath the weight of steel and fire. The rangers moved as they had been trained, shadows in the gray, striking with precision, vanishing before the enemy could return fire. Side burned hotter, every step tearing fresh pain through her ribs, but she ignored it. She forced her body to obey, to steady, to stand. Her men needed her more than her pain did. Still, the thought lingered, heavy and quiet, beneath the roar of rifles and the scream of mortars. How much longer could they hold? And what would be left of them when the silence finally returned? Why hadn't the enemy broken yet? They had lost their commander, their convoy lay shattered, their comrades scattered into ruin. Any ordinary force would have folded into retreat, but still they came. Still the fog carried the rhythm of boots, the growl of engines, the bark of commands. Reinforcements. Pressed her cheek against the rifle stock, scope cutting a narrow circle through the gray. She saw them, disciplined lines, armored shapes, weapons lifted with precision instead of panic. This was no scattered remnant. This was the next wave. Her jaw tight, her rangers were fewer now, tired, bloodied. The wounded pressed their backs against stone, rifles clenched in trembling hands, refusing to let go. Ammunition had been counted and counted again. Every round mattered, every decision mattered more. 12 hours, no matter the cost. The words echoed like a curse. The pass was already gouged by mortars, littered with shattered vehicles, soaked with blood that the fog had tried and failed to conceal. Yet war was greedy. It demanded more. Steadied her breath, ignoring the fire in her ribs, the damp heat of blood soaking through her flight suit. She whispered into the calm, calm and deliberate. Hold, wait, let them come closer. Her men obeyed without question. Their rifles rested steady, their eyes fixed forward, their faith anchored on her silence. Through the scope, she watched them advance. The enemy commander barked orders sharp enough to cut through the fog. Infantry moved in tight formation, their bayonets glinting faintly. Armored vehicles ground forward, turrets swiveling with mechanical hunger. Exhaled once. Now. Her rifle cracked, the suppressed shot whispering through the gray. A soldier folded, her rangers followed, precise bursts cutting into the front line. The enemy staggered, momentum faltering. But these soldiers did not panic. They adjusted, reformed, returned fire with disciplined volleys that cracked against bark and stone. Splintering cover, machine guns roared from turrets, chewing through the undergrowth, shredding branches into rain. The pass erupted again. Bullets sliced the fog, grenades rolled and burst, their echoes crashing off the cliffs. Shouts collided, amplified by echoes until every command seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere. Shifted her rifle, ignoring the pain that clawed her side. She fired, reloaded, fired again. Her men moved on her signals, a raised hand, a flick of her wrist, each gesture exact, each choice buying seconds more. Seconds, that was all they ever had. A mortar whistled down, striking just beyond their ridge. Soil and stone erupted, slamming into her helmet, rattling her ears. She staggered. Her breath ripped from her chest, but steadied herself with clenched teeth. The world blurred for an instant, then sharpened. Another squad was pinned. Voices cracked through the calm, strained, urgent. "North slope, we're caught." The transmission cut off with a roar of gunfire. His breath hitched. She scanned the slope through her scope, saw shadows shifting, saw her men pressed low behind splintered trunks. Enemy fire poured over them in arcs, cutting the ground apart. She made her decision before hesitation could grow. Covering fire now. Her men answered instantly, unleashing volleys into the enemy line, broke from her position again, sprinting low through mud and smoke. Her lungs burning, her sides screaming with pain, bullets cracked overhead. Mortar blasts heaved the earth, but she kept moving, her rifle clutched tight. She slid into cover beside the pinned squad, her breath ragged, her wound burning hotter. "Shift fire left," she commanded, her hands slicing the air. Her men adjusted, forcing the enemy to pivot, raised her rifle, fired bursts into advancing infantry. Each shot was agony, but her body obeyed, it had to. "Move on my signal," she snapped. The squad obeyed, crawling, sprinting, slipping free one by one, fired until the last man passed her, then followed, her boots sliding in churned mud, her vision swimming with pain. When they regrouped, one ranger gripped her arm, his eyes wide at the blood soaking her side. She shook him off, jaw set. There was no time. The enemy pressed harder. Artillery rained again, shells whistling down in relentless rhythm. Explosions split the fog, tore trees apart, churned the ground into fire and dust. The forest that had sheltered them was collapsing, stripped bare by steel. Crouched low, her chest heaving, her mind racing. The fog was thinning, sunlight pierced through in shafts, illuminating churned soil, twisted metal, broken bodies. What had been a realm of shadows was becoming bare, exposed. Their greatest ally, the mist, was slipping away. Her heart pounded. Without the fog, they were hunters stripped of cover, phantoms turned flesh. The enemy would see them, and when seen, they could be destroyed. She pressed her hand to her wound, felt the warmth of blood, the weakness creeping. She forced her breath steady, whispered into the calm. "We fall back, deeper into the pass, set the charges." Her men obeyed without question. Engineers moved quickly, planting explosives along the cliffs, concealing them beneath soil and stone, every movement deliberate, every action rehearsed. Oversaw with narrowed eyes, her mind cutting through haze and pain. She corrected placements, adjusted angles, checked wires. Her hand shook only once, briefly, before she forced it still. When the last charge was set, she gave the signal. The Rangers fell back farther, vanishing into the gray. The enemy surged forward, convinced of their momentum. Armored vehicles ground into the choke point, infantry crowding close behind. Crouched low, her hand raised, her breath caught. Now! The mountains roared. Charges detonated in sequence, cliffs convulsing, stone breaking loose in massive slabs, trees toppled, roots tearing, trunks smashing into the convoy with thunderous force. The road sealed itself again in ruin, retreat cut off forever. Dust and smoke swallowed the enemy, their shouts fractured into panic, vehicles smashed against fallen stone, armor crumpling, soldiers scattered. Her rangers struck, suppressed rifles whispered, grenades burst in sharp flashes, blades slid between ribs in silence. The fog turned the pass into a slaughterhouse once more. And yet amid ruin felt something shift inside her, a thought she could not silence. This was no longer about holding the pass. This was no longer about delay. This was survival painted as sacrifice, and survival was slipping. Her side burned, her vision blurred, her breath caught in shallow gasps. She steadied herself with will alone, with the silence her men needed her to keep. But inside, in the quiet no one could see, a question pressed harder than pain. Was there a line between duty and cruelty? And if there was, had they already crossed it? The fog thickened again, wrapping the battlefield in gray. Enemy shouts dwindled into fragments. Gunfire sputtered, then fell to silence. Her rangers crouched low, rifles steady, their breaths harsh but measured. They had survived another wave. But for how long? Pressed her hand against her ribs, her blood hot and insistent. She forced herself to stand straight, to keep her face calm. Her men watched her, waiting for the steadiness they had always found in her silence. She gave them what they needed. But inside she felt the weight of truth. The mountain would not let them leave. Not all of them. Maybe not her. Why did the air feel thinner now? Drew a breath, shallow and sharp, and it caught like a knife between her ribs. Each inhale burned hotter. Every exhale came ragged, as though the mountain itself pressed on her chest. The fog had begun to change. It no longer rolled heavy and endless. It came in broken veils now, torn by artillery, thinned by fire, burned away in patches where sunlight pierced through. The world was becoming visible again, exposed. Her rangers crouched low in new positions, deeper in the pass. Their faces were drawn tight, their eyes dark with fatigue, some cradled bandaged wounds, their uniforms blackened with blood and dirt. Their hands still held rifles steady, but the steadiness cost them, saw it in the tremor of their grips, the stiffness of their movements. They were breaking, not yet shattered but close. And it was her duty to hold them together. She pressed her hand against her side, felt warmth seep between her fingers, soaking through layers of fabric. The wound had deepened. The shrapnel cut hadn't just grazed her, it had torn into her, left a trail of fire she could not ignore. Every movement pulled it wider, every breath fed the flame. But they could not see it. Not yet. She forced her body upright, her posture unyielding. Her silence, as always, was their anchor. If she faltered, they would drown. Through her scope she scanned the pass. The enemy moved in fragments now, scattered squads probing through the fog. Their movements were careful, deliberate, no longer the frantic chaos of before. Reinforcements had steadied them. Orders had been given. They were hunting now. Pulse steadied, calm returned, though the pain screamed inside her. She whispered into the calm, left flank 2 down. Her rangers shifted silently, their shots precise. 2 enemy figures dropped, folded into the mud, the rest scattered, their shouts twisted by echoes, their rifles firing at shadows. The forest swallowed the noise, then fell still again. For a moment let her head rest against the stock of her rifle. Her breath trembled once before she caught it. Her vision swam at the edges, dark creeping into gray. She closed her eyes, only for a second, only long enough to steady. A memory surfaced, unbidden. A cockpit, the roar of an engine, the sky wide and endless. She had been younger then, her braids shorter, her eyes sharper with a confidence she no longer recognized. Flying had felt like freedom, like control from above. War had seemed manageable. Targets were shapes, missions were clean, survival was simple math. But here, in the mud, there was no math, only weight. The weight of blood, of silence, of eyes that looked to her for steadiness she did not always feel. She opened her eyes again, forced the memory down. The present demanded her. "Commander," a voice cracked through the calm, hesitant, uneasy. "We were running low." It wasn't just ammunition. It was everything: energy, faith, hope. She pressed the button on her comm, her voice calm, firm. "Rounds are tools, not answers. Use only when certain. Conserve. The fog is still ours." But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. The fog was slipping. It no longer hid them as it once had. It came in tatters, shifting like cloth torn by too many hands. And yet lies had their place in war. Lies could steady hands. Lies could buy time. Another volley cracked through the mist. Gunfire from the right slope. Her rangers ducked, returned, burst sharp and measured, swung her scope, fired once, saw a figure fall. Her men followed, pressing the enemy back. Still the cost mounted. Another ranger staggered, his shoulder torn. Another fell silent, his body dragged back by comrades. His rifle laid gently across him. The silence after each death pressed harder than the gunfire itself. His heart clenched, though her face stayed calm. Each man lost felt carved into her, etched into bone, but she carried it quietly, always quietly. The hours dragged, every minute stretched into an eternity. The enemy pressed, fell back, pressed again. The rangers shifted, repositioned, fought like shadows that refused to be pinned. But their numbers dwindled, their strength thinned. At one pause in the chaos, crouched behind a boulder, her breath shallow, her hand pressed tight against her wound. Her blood slicked her palm, her vision blurred. A ranger slid beside her, eyes wide. "Ma'am, you're hit." She silenced him with a glance. Her voice was soft, low, edged with command. "Not a word, not to anyone. They need me whole." His throat worked as though he wanted to argue, but he swallowed it, nodded once, and returned to position. Leaned back against the stone, her jaw tight, her body trembling in ways she couldn't fully control. She felt weakness creep in, quiet but insistent. She pushed it down with sheer will. They could not see her break. Through the fog, enemy voices rose again, closer, stronger. The next wave was forming. His heart thudded once, heavy and deliberate. She thought of the order again, 12 hours, delay at all costs. She thought of the faces of her men, drawn tight with exhaustion, their faith pinned to her steadiness. She thought of the boy she had shot earlier, young and terrified. His life ended because duty demanded it. And she wondered, not for the first time, if this was nobility or cruelty. But there was no time for answers. She lifted her rifle again. Her hand shook once briefly, then steadied, her eye pressed to the scope. She exhaled, slow, quiet, and waited for the next shadow to emerge. The fog thickened slightly, veils shifting across the battlefield. For now, it still sheltered them. For now, it still made phantoms of her men. But felt the truth pressing harder than the wound in her side. The fog was not endless. The men were not endless. She was not endless. And when all of those things gave out, what would remain? Silence, only silence. Why did the fog feel thinner with every breath? It still drifted between the trees, curling around roots and rocks, but it no longer cloaked the world as it once had. Shafts of sunlight cut through, piercing the gray, illuminating bodies and ruin that could no longer hide. The forest was becoming bare, naked. Cross crouched low behind a fractured boulder, her rifle steady against her shoulder. Though her hands trembled beneath the weight of exhaustion, her side burned, soaked through with blood that refused to stop. Every breath was fire, but still she held. Her rangers, what remained of them, moved with weary precision. They slipped between broken trunks and churned mud, their faces pale, their eyes hollowed by fatigue. Some carried wounds bound in torn cloth, others limped on strained legs. They had no illusions left. They knew what this was now. Survival was not promised, only delay, only the order. From beyond the ridge came the rumble, engines again. The sound was heavier this time, deeper, layered with the weight of armor, the enemy was not finished. Reinforcements kept coming, as though the mountain itself funneled endless ranks into the pass. Pressed her cheek against the rifle stock. Through her scope she saw them. Armored vehicles grinding forward, turrets swiveling, infantry crouched low as they advanced. Their discipline was now. Their fear had hardened into determination. Her jaw clenched, her breath slowed. 12 hours, she whispered to herself, though no one could hear, no matter the cost. She signaled her men, positions shifted, weapons raised. The trap was thinner now, but it was still a trap. The first shots came from her rifle, always her rifle. A figure dropped, another staggered. Her men followed with precise bursts, cutting into the line. The enemy staggered but did not break. Their fire came back hard, sharp, relentless. Machine guns roared from turrets, tearing the forest apart. Bullets cracked through branches, shredded what little cover remained. Grenades rolled and burst, their echoes splitting the cliffs. Mortars whistled down, shaking the ground with each detonation. Her rangers clung low, firing in short, measured bursts. They were outnumbered. And yet they held, not because of strength, but because of discipline, because silence steadied them when nothing else could. Still the line frayed. One ranger fell with a cry, his body dragged back by comrades. Another slumped against a tree, his rifle slipping from his hands. The silence after each loss pressed heavier, but no one spoke. Their grief was folded into fire, into duty. His vision blurred. She blinked hard, forced clarity through the pain. Her finger tightened on the trigger, each shot an act of will. She shifted positions, crawled low, directed squads with sharp hand signals. Every movement cost her more, every breath scraped raw. But she could not stop, not yet. The enemy pressed closer. Infantry surged forward, their shouts sharp, their rifles cutting arcs across the pass. The rangers fell back in measured steps, drawing them deeper, deeper still, toward the last charges planted in the cliffs. Felt the rhythm of it, the inevitability of it. The mountain would close again. It had to. She gave the signal. A thunderous roar split the air. Charges erupted, stone convulsed. Massive slabs breaking loose, trees toppled with roots tearing free, trunks smashing down in thunderous collapse. The road sealed once more in ruin, trapping the enemy inside the pass. Dust and smoke swallowed the world. Her rangers struck, suppressed rifles whispered, grenades burst, blades flashed in the gray. The fight collapsed into brutal close-quarters combat. Faces appeared only at the instant of death. Pistols cracked, knives slid, screams cut short by silence. Fought among them, her wound tearing wider with each movement. She pressed her rifle tight, fired with precision, swung her knife when the distance closed. Her braid clung damp against her back, soaked with sweat and blood. She was not just their commander now. She was the Wraith they had whispered of, the phantom that struck and vanished, everywhere and nowhere at once. But even phantoms bleed. A sudden burst of gunfire cracked through the smoke, bullets sparking from stone near her head. One tore past her arm, slicing cloth and skin. Another struck the rock behind, spraying shards across her face. She staggered, caught herself, pressed forward again. Her men saw it, saw her bleed, their eyes flicked to her. Fear, concern, the kind that cracks resolve. She met their gaze, hard and steady, silencing it before it could spread. Pain did not matter, only command mattered. She raised her hand, signaled forward. They obeyed, their faith restored by her steadiness, though inside she felt her body failing. The battle stretched into nightmare, hours blurred. The fog thinned until it was no longer a shield but a veil, too thin to hide, too thick to see clearly. The forest was broken by fire and steel, its soil soaked with blood. Her rangers dwindled. Each volley cost them more. Each push forward left another body in the mud. And yet they fought on. Because she fought on. Through it all carried the weight of silence, the silence of her wound, the silence of her doubt, the silence of the truth she had not spoken aloud, that not all of them would leave this place alive. But still she led. Still she stood. Still she fought. And in the depths of her chest, beneath pain and exhaustion, one truth pressed harder than any bullet. The mountain would not let her walk out. Why was the mountain so quiet now? The battle had raged for hours, waves of steel and fire crashing into the pass. Reinforcements had come and fallen. Armor had ground forward and been shattered by stone. The forest had burned, collapsed, and buried itself in ruin. And yet now silence. The fog drifted low, tired, worn thin. Fires hissed in the damp. Their orange glow muted within the gray. Pines creaked overhead, their boughs groaning like old voices weary of witness. Cross stood among what remained of her rangers. They were fewer than half their number, their faces hollow, their bodies ragged with wounds. They crouched low, tending to the injured, laying rifles gently across the fallen. No one spoke louder than a murmur. Grief was carried in silence, always silence. Her side burned hotter now, each breath shallow, ragged, her strength fraying at the edges. The wound had deepened past endurance. She knew it, she felt it. Her blood soaked the green of her old flight suit, clinging damp beneath the harness. Her body wanted to fold, to collapse. But she would not yet, not while they watched. She walked among them, slow, deliberate, her braid trailing heavy against her back. At each body she paused, her hand brushing rifles laid in tribute. At each wounded man she gave a glance, a nod, a silence that steadied more than words ever could. Her men looked at her as they always had, for steadiness, for proof that the world had not abandoned them. She gave it, though inside her vision blurred and her chest caught fire with every breath. She turned her eyes back to the pass. The convoy lay shattered, twisted steel and broken bodies scattered like remnants of a storm. Their enemy commander, the last defiant figure, lay among them, swallowed by mist. The enemy was broken for now, but knew the truth. Reinforcements would come again. The mountain would never stop demanding, and her men could not give any more. She exhaled slowly, her hand pressed once more to her wound. This was the end. She whispered into the calm, her voice soft but steady. Prepare to withdraw South Ridge quietly. Her men froze, some turned toward her, eyes wide, disbelief flickering. Withdraw, now, after all they had endured. But in her tone, in the silence threaded through her words, they understood this was not surrender. It was survival, the only survival left to them. One by one, they nodded slowly, reluctantly. But with faith, they began to move, carrying the wounded, shouldering rifles, slipping into the thinning fog. Stayed. She crouched low, her rifle balanced across her knees, her eyes scanning the pass one final time. The fog curled around her, soft, almost tender, as though it knew. She thought of the briefing tent, the dim light, the map with pencil lines, the order. 12 hours, no matter the cost. She thought of the silence she had given as her oath, and she thought of her men, the ones still alive because she had carried that silence for them. A sound rose in the distance, engines, boots, another wave. Her breath steadied, her finger brushed the trigger guard. She would not let the enemy find her rangers retreating. She would not let them fall into ruin. She would give them space, give them time, the only gift left. Her chest burned, her body trembling, her vision swimming, but her silence held. Through the scope she saw them emerge, silhouettes in the fog, weapons raised, searching. She exhaled once. Her rifle whispered, one fell, then another. The enemy shouted, rifles raised toward her shadow. She fired again, again. Her body shaking with every shot, her blood spread warm across her side, but her hands remained steady. She was no longer commander, no longer ranger to them. She was the wraith they feared, the phantom they whispered of, a figure in the mist, striking from nowhere. They fired into the fog, their bullets cracking against stone and bark, but she remained. Her rifle whispered, her silence cut sharper than their shouts. Her men slipped farther away, unseen, their footsteps vanishing into the ridges. And stayed. The battle closed around her, a storm of fire and shadows. She fought as she always had, calm, precise, deliberate. Her braid clung damp against her back, her breath shallow, her body failing, but she did not break. Not where they could see. Not where her silence could still shield them. The fog folded closer, blurring fire and smoke into gray. The forest leaned in, its ancient trunks like witnesses. Her rifle whispered one last time. Then the mountain fell quiet. The rangers emerged hours later, slipping from the ridges into the valley below. Their faces were drawn, their bodies battered, but they carried with them the silence of their commander. Not one spoke of her final stand. Not one broke the weight of what she had given them. They walked on, carrying the wounded, covering the fallen, their steps heavy but unbroken behind them. The mountain swallowed its secrets, fog curling back into the pass, erasing prints, softening scars, hiding the ruin within its veil. And among those secrets, one truth lingered. A commander who had become more than flesh, more than rank, a figure of silence, of steadiness, of sacrifice to her men. She would always be Major Cross, but to those who faced her, she would always be the Wraith. The forest would remember. The fog would carry whispers long after bodies rotted and wrecks rusted away. And somewhere in that silence lived a lesson too heavy for words. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.